Okay, so I'd like to cover part 2 of our polygonal modeling today. So we're going to cover a couple things. There is a slide tutorial that some of you might have seen already that I'm going to follow roughly in order. So I'll be toggling kind of between Maya and then the tutorial. So first things first, of course, we're going to save our projects using our last name, the project, the year, the month, the day nomenclature. We're going to set our default workspace. Super important. Remember, really important to set that default workspace. And then I think I've got a list of what we'll be covering here. So we're going to cover extrusions, welding, beveling, which we reviewed in class last time, bridging two edges, smoothing our surfaces, subdivisions, edge loops, which if you don't know what that means, you will by the end of this video, and then some sculpting tools. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of the presentation. I'm going to use it for reference so I can follow along roughly in order. So what I'll do is jump back over to Maya, and you'll see I'm in my quad view here. So if I wanted to get into my single pane, I can toggle between these panes to get into a multi-view situation. So before I start adding anything, I'm going to save the project. So I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As. I'm going to go back up into my top level 102 directory, this Art 102 directory, and I'm using the little blue up arrow to jump up in the file directory. I'm going to create a new folder with that little yellow icon, and I'm going to name it Holberton, and then this is Poly Model 2. And the year, and the month, and the date. And then I'm going to jump into that folder. There's nothing in there, I just created it. And so I'm going to say set project, which will create my default workspace. So again, that's set project down here. And then I'm going to go find that folder. That's the Poly Model 2. I can select here and see the full file name at the bottom in the directory, double click into it, and then say set. And then, yes, please do create that default workspace. I can see that little file pop up, and now I can save as. So I'm going to save this as Project 1 Poly Model 2. And then update the date. Okay, save as. And yes, saving as a student version. Okay, great. So now I have my scene set up in my Maya Classic viewport, and I'm in my single view. While we're modeling, I'll probably be toggling between a couple different of those viewports. So I'm going to start with a cube. I have interactive creation turned on. If you would like to turn that on, again, that is under Create, under Polygon Primitives, and then Interactive Creation. If I don't have that turned on, so I just checked that off, I press W for my hotkey for transform. If I don't have interactive creation turned on, so it's not checked anymore, and I create a cube, it's just going to create a cube in the center of my grid with a unit of 1, 1, and 1, which is, fine. Maybe that's what you prefer. I like to be able to kind of control the shape as I make it. So I'm going to delete that cube. I'm going to select the cube I just made. I'm going to press W to bring up the transform handles, and then kind of bring it back into center. So the channel box editor, again, is going to tell you where in space what your translation is. So if I wanted to actually bring this back to 0, 0, 0, the origin, I would type in 0, 0, 0 here. If I wanted to scale my cube, so this is set at a scale of 100%. That's based on whatever shape it is when I made it, right? So I used interactive creation. So my cube isn't 1 dimension by 1 dimension by 1 dimension. It looks more like like 2 almost to 1 in height. But it is 100% the size that I made it. So our scale is a decimal. So if I function rather than a percentage. So if I wanted the scale to be half, I could type in half and then half. and then half. And that's just, changing the scale. It's not changing the base size of my shape. The base size of my shape is back here with under my attribute editor, and then under the poly, so the polygonal shape, or the polygonal tab here. So here you can see that the width, the height, and the depth hasn't actually changed. I can modify those here, but if I toggle back over to my channel box layer editor, it's still showing up as half size. All right, so scale is a percentage of the base size. I'm going to turn this back to 111. It's going to grow, and then I'm going to go back to my attribute editor, and I'm going to change this to maybe like 6, and then maybe like, I'm going to do 6 this way, 4, and then maybe 4. All right. Great. Width, depth. I wish it was more, anyway. So I'm going to be editing this shape, so I want to give it more faces to edit. So that's the subdivisions. I'm going to bring those up a little bit. Let's see here, just so I have more to work with as I start modeling. Okay. Great. So first thing, I'm going to intermittently save. So Maya likes to crash. I think it's a good idea to intermittently save when you kind of reach milestones in your project. So I'm just going to say save scene. Let's go continue. That's great. All right. So back here to the slide presentation. We've already gone through and done our created our default workspace and saved our project. There's a couple preferences that you can change inside of Maya. You can get to the preferences by going to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then Preferences. You can also get there by clicking on this little like orange running man with a gear next to running person with a gear next to them. It'll bring up the same tab. In the interface category, if you don't have your 3-button mouse, yet this cursor and this interface default settings for 3-button mouse is cursor and multi-touch with multi-scroll enabled and multi-touch gesture enabled. You can also, if you want to set up for your trackpad, you can, the default settings are a 1-finger swipe will move your cursor, and then a shift and a 2-finger swipe will toggle your view. I have had a really hard time with trackpad in Maya. I don't recommend it. The default settings for our units, so that's over here in our settings, are for centimeters, and then we're going to be animating at 24 frames per second. When that comes up, that'll become an issue. And then all of the angular units are in degrees. Okay, so those are the defaults. Here's more information about gestural input and multi-touch devices with Maya if you would like to do some research on your own. I'm going to be continuing to teach, assuming that you have a 3-button mouse. Okay, so we're going to go back into our modeling toolkit. And the first thing I'm going to show you is a soft selection. Okay, so 2 things with soft selection I'm actually going to show you. The first is how to get into a tool settings. So I think when I turned on my scroll to cursor, scroll to my mouse function, we went into a tool setting that was under view and then camera tools and then that dolly tool, and I had you click that little white box that brought you into the tool setting. And I, in order to zoom to my mouse, I unchecked towards center. So the way that you bring up a tool setting for the selected tool, so right now I have my pointer selected, my cursor tool selected. If I want to get into the settings for my selection tool, I can double click. So one thing I should actually, before I go too far away, well, yeah, since I have it up. So the last tool that I've used will always show up above my quad view, single view selection. So this is actually the dolly tool that I just brought up. So I can double click the dolly tool to bring up the tool settings again. Same thing is true for my cursor over here, which is always up in my in my toolbar here, if I double click the cursor, I'll get some selection options. So up until this point, I'm going to just leave this window kind of over here. Up until this point, when I right click in my viewport and go into, like, for instance, my face selection mode, ooh, I have it turned on. I have symmetry turned on. Let's see, turn that off, reset off. You got a little preview of where we're going. Okay, so up until now, right, I have my single cursor. When I select an object or select a face, I can type in W, E, and R for scale, E for rotation, W for translate, and I can drag a face out at a time, right? And drag it up in space, and it's just moving that single face, and the other faces around it will kind of stretch to meet that face. I can turn something on called soft selection, which is just kind of as it sounds. So if I turn on this soft selection, so that's from the drop down menu here. So when I double click into my selection tool, I can turn soft selection on here. So with the little checkbox, turn on soft select, and now you can see that face is still selected, but there's this kind of heat map around it to show you, like, how the selection is going to fall off. So it's pretty big right now, like the entire it looks like the entire cube is selected to a certain degree. So I can bring that soft selection down, and it will soft select a much smaller area. So now if I press W, maybe I'll turn on my quad view so you can kind of see what's going on. Now if I press W to move, it's actually going to grab the faces around that face that I selected and move them with a gradual drop off. So there's like a gradual drop off of degree of control focused around the center. So this face will move with my cursor at a 1-to-1 ratio, and then there's kind of a gentle drop off so that these faces are being affected by that face that gets pulled out, but it's at a much smaller rate. So what you get are these more of a soft curve rather than these hard edges. So soft selection is great to create those kind of soft shapes, right? And again, you can always bring that back up. So I've got my translate tool open, and my tool settings are open over here, so I can go down to my soft selection, and I can maybe, let's say I want to bring this face out a little bit and bring down the radius a little bit more, and I can kind of pull faces and push pixels around with a little bit more of like an acute control, but it will give you kind of harder edges. And I can do the same thing up here. May actually go into vertex mode, and I can select a vertex and kind of move that, or rotate around. Maybe I'll select that vertex and kind of bring it out the radius a little bit more, and I'm kind of pulling out a little bit more of my shape. And then maybe I want a dimple or something in the middle. Okay. So that's all well and good. The other thing that I can do is, and you saw that little preview. Let me zoom in here. Front, side. And yeah. The other thing that I can do is turn on symmetry. So symmetry will allow me to select symmetrical faces. So if I turn on like a world, turn on my world object Y, and turn back on my face selection. And will it allow me, or have I modified this too? Yeah, I think I've modified this too greatly. There actually aren't any more symmetrical faces too. Oh, it looks like there might be. Yeah, here. So this will allow me, before I started selecting and making these great modifications to the shape, there were actually faces that were symmetrical across all of our axes. So here you can see these faces are still symmetrical. And then here the faces started getting affected by the soft selection tool. So let me actually create a new shape that I haven't modified to show you a little bit better. Make this sphere. Okay, so now I've got a sphere, and I can turn on that symmetrical selection again if it's not already on. Okay, great. So go into my face mode, is. And turn off my soft selection. There we go. So now you can see across the Y. So I am mirroring across the object's Y-axis. I'm going to go into world Y just to double check. Yeah. So it's going to mirror. So you can see down here this Y. It's going to mirror along that kind of vertical axis, right? So the Y-axis is this green axis down here in the corner. So all of the faces kind of that mirror one another in the vertical will be selected. So if I select these two, if I wanted to make legs or something, this is useful. And then I can turn on the extrude, and I can, or the transform, and I can pull out a couple of these sets of legs or noses or whatever that are symmetrical. So that can be really useful. I'll come back to that in a second when we get into sculpting. So that is the symmetrical settings. If I wanted to select, let me undo that, across a different axis, let's say along the Z axis, this one's going to be harder to see, but I can go into top mode and you can kind of see. So this one's going to allow me to select parallel along the Z axis, right? And then symmetry, and then along the, did I do X? Yeah, along the X, right? And so this is a really fast way to get, like, when you're modeling things that are symmetrical, really easy to kind of get in and push those vertices around.